I wasn't supposed to be on that moon. Let me just say that right now, before anything else. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the Cashin Belt, wasn't supposed to be running salvage ops in restricted galactic space, and I definitely wasn't supposed to be the man who found her. But here's the thing about life, and I've learned this the hard way across 11 years of deep space work. It doesn't ask you what you're supposed to do. It just hands you a situation and waits to see if you're going to fall apart or hold together. I held together, barely. Her name, when I finally understood it, was something I couldn't pronounce for weeks. My tongue wasn't built for the soft consonants of her language, those layered harmonic syllables that sounded like two voices speaking at once. So I called her Lyra. She didn't object. Maybe she liked it. Maybe she was just too exhausted to correct me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Start at the beginning. That's what my father always said when something complicated happened. Start at the beginning, Marcus, and don't skip the parts that make you look bad. So here's the beginning. The beginning was a distress beacon. Not an official one. Not the kind that gets routed through galactic union frequencies and triggers a proper rescue response with medics and protocol teams and lawyers filing jurisdiction claims before anyone's even reached the crash site. This was a ghost signal, the kind that only shows up if you're running modified receivers, which I was, because modified receivers are one of those things that are technically illegal and practically necessary if you're doing the kind of work I was doing. Salvage work, independent salvage. The polite term is unaffiliated recovery specialist. The impolite term is what the GU inspectors called me the 3 times they boarded my ship, which I won't repeat here because I'm trying to tell a story, not fill out a grievance form. My ship was called the Rendell. She was a mid-weight hauler, 22 years old, built in the Jovian shipyards back when people still believed in over-engineering things. Her hull was patchwork, different alloys from different decades, each repair a small chapter in her history. She was ugly in the way that working things get ugly. Every scar meant she'd survived something. I loved that ship. I was running a standard sweep through the outer Cashin Belt, an area technically flagged as contested jurisdiction, which meant nobody official wanted to be there, which meant it was perfect for independent operators like me. The belt was full of debris from the 3-fleet collision 14 years earlier, when a navigational cascade error had turned 3 commercial convoy routes into one catastrophic intersection. Nobody talked about it much anymore. The official inquiry had produced 11,000 pages of conclusions and 0 accountability. Standard stuff. What wasn't standard stuff was the beacon I picked up at 3:40 local ship time, while I was sleeping in the pilot's chair because my bunk had developed a humidity problem and smelled like a wet dog. SEREN, that's my ship's navigation AI, and yes, I named her, and no, that's not weird, she woke me with a soft chime rather than the alert klaxon. SEREN knows me well enough to understand that the klaxon produces a startled response that leaves me useless for about 45 seconds. The chime gives me time to surface properly. Marcus, she said, anomalous signal, modified frequency. Origin, debris cluster 77 Kappa, approximately 0.8 light minutes from current position. I rubbed my face. My mouth tasted like the recycled coffee I'd been drinking for 6 days. Ghost signal. Consistent with a compressed emergency broadcast, yes. Non-standard encoding. I would estimate 60 to 70% probability that this is a genuine distress call rather than equipment malfunction or debris echo. 60 to 70%. SEREN is honest about uncertainty in a way that most people find unsatisfying. I've always appreciated it. I sat up straighter, species origin. A pause. SEREN doesn't pause unless she's genuinely uncertain, so I paid attention. The encoding structure has elements consistent with Velhari communication protocols, she said. However, I want to note that this is a preliminary identification only. I have limited reference data for Velhari transmissions. I was quiet for a moment. Velhari. Right. Okay. The Velhari are, and I want to be careful how I say this, because I've met exactly 2 of them in my life prior to this incident, and both encounters were brief and professional, and not the kind of thing that gives you real understanding. They're one of the older spacefaring civilizations in this region. Old enough to have been traveling the stars when humans were still arguing about whether the universe rotated around our planet. They're tall, bipedal, with a bioluminescent layer beneath their skin that responds to emotional states in ways they can't entirely control. Their governance structure is complex enough that human political scientists have written entire careers' worth of papers about it without reaching consensus. What everyone agrees on is that they're proud, intensely proud. The kind of species that views asking for help as something between a philosophical failure and a personal insult. Which meant that if a Velhari was broadcasting a distress signal, even a ghost signal, even an unofficial one, something had gone very, very wrong. Plot a course, I said. Marcus, I should note that Debris Cluster 77 Kappa is. I know what it is, SCREN. Restricted jurisdiction. GU survey flagged it 18 months ago as. Plot the course. Another pause, then, course plotted. Estimated arrival 41 minutes at current fuel efficiency. I was already pulling on my work jacket. It's a battered thing, dark gray, with a strip of reflective tape on the left shoulder that I keep meaning to replace because half of it has peeled away. The chest pocket has a broken zipper. I've been fixing it for 3 years and never quite getting around to finishing. My ex-wife, Priya, used to say that my relationship with that jacket was the most committed relationship in my life. She wasn't wrong exactly. SCREN, I said, run diagnostics on the emergency kit and charge up the atmospheric suit, the one that actually works, not the one with the seal problem on the left elbow. Already running diagnostics, she said. The left elbow seal has been flagged for replacement approximately. 47 times, yes, I know. I'll order the part when we get back to the Meridian station. You said the same thing after the Ptolemy wreck job. SCREN. Diagnostics running. Debris Cluster 77 Kappa was not a pleasant place to look at. I've spent a lot of time in the belt, and I've seen my share of wreckage, but this cluster had a particular quality of violence about it. The pieces were too jagged, too close together. Whatever had happened here hadn't been a slow disintegration, it had been sudden, catastrophic. The debris field was shaped by an explosion, not by time. The Rendel's exterior lights swept over twisted metal as SCREN navigated us through the outer edge of the cluster. Some of the pieces were recognizable, a cargo bay door here, a section of drive housing there, fragments of hull plating with markings in a script I couldn't read. Velhari script, SCREN confirmed when I asked. The ship had been Velhari built. Can you determine the vessel type? I asked. Partially, the hull composition is consistent with Velhari diplomatic-class construction. Not military, not commercial freight. Diplomatic class? So this was a diplomatic vessel, possibly a royal courier, given the construction grade. Velhari royal couriers use a specific alloy reinforcement in the outer hull that I'm detecting in fragments of approximately. Royal courier, I repeated. The words sat there for a moment, heavy with implication. The signal is coming from approximately 90 meters ahead, SCREN said. I'm detecting life signs, one, faint but consistent. One survivor, one life sign in all of this wreckage. Set us down, I said, or as close to down as we can get in 0G. I'll anchor to the largest debris section, magnetic clamps, you'll need the tether on your suit. I know how EVA works, SCREN. You unclipped your tether during the Ptolemy wreck job. That was... and during the Hirsch station salvage. Those were different. And during the... I will clip my tether, SCREN. I will clip it and I will check it twice, and I will be a very responsible adult. Thank you, she said, in the dry tone she uses when she knows she's won an argument. The atmosphere inside the largest remaining section of the wreck was breathable, barely. Some kind of emergency life support system had maintained a pocket of atmosphere, enough to keep someone alive if they were very lucky or very determined. Probably both. I found her in what had once been a sealed chamber near the center of the wreck. The room had held its structural integrity even as everything around it had been torn apart, which told me it had been built to hold. A panic room, maybe, or a secure cabin designed to survive impact events. The door was partially collapsed, bent inward at an angle that had jammed it in a half-open position. I had to take off my pack and push myself through sideways, which took about 2 minutes of awkward maneuvering and produced a bruise on my right hip that I'd be feeling for a week. And then I was inside. The emergency lighting was dim, a low amber glow from strips along the base of the walls, the kind of light that's designed to run on almost no power for as long as possible. It turned everything the color of old gold. The air smelled wrong. Too thin, too warm, and beneath that, something else. Something like ozone and something like flowers, which is a combination I can't explain except to say that's exactly what it was. She was in the corner, sitting upright, which surprised me. I'd expected unconscious. I'd expected someone barely clinging on. But she was sitting upright, with her back against the wall and her legs extended in front of her. And she was watching me come through the door with an expression that I couldn't read. Because Velhari faces are not human faces. And 11 years in space teaches you that assuming you can read an alien expression is one of the fastest ways to make a serious mistake. She was tall. Even sitting, I could tell she was tall, longer-limbed than a human, with a proportional slenderness that made her look almost architectural, like someone had designed her with an aesthetic consideration that biology usually ignores. Her skin was a deep blue-gray, and the bioluminescent layer beneath it was doing something complicated. A slow pulse of pale light that moved in patterns, dimming and brightening in sequences that SEREN would later tell me were distress indicators. She was wearing the remains of what had been formal clothing. Dark fabric, intricately structured, much of it torn, something that might have been ceremonial. Her left arm was held close to her body in a way that said injury, not comfort. On her face, and this was the thing I kept coming back to later when I was trying to reconstruct the moment, was something that might have been relief. Might have been. I wasn't certain enough to call it that. But it was something. She spoke. Her voice was the thing I'd been told about but hadn't quite understood until I heard it. The harmonic layering, it was like two voices occupying the same throat, a primary tone and a resonant undertone, creating this complex, almost musical quality. Not loud. She was clearly weakened. But even weakened, her voice had that quality, and it stopped me where I was for just a second. I don't know what she said. I didn't have a Velhari translation module. Nobody outside GU Diplomatic Corps carries one. They're not commercially available. They cost about 4 years of my income. So I stood there and she spoke, and I understood nothing except the tone. The tone said, "You came." "I don't speak Velhari," I said, keeping my voice slow and even. "I'm sorry, my name is Marcus Ryle. I almost said independent salvage operator, and then reconsidered the impression that might give. I picked up your beacon. I'm here to help." She studied me. Her eyes were large for her face, golden amber, with an unusual iris pattern that caught the amber light and threw it back changed. She blinked once slowly. Then she said something shorter. 2 words, maybe 3, depending on where you counted the harmonic layers. SEREN through my earpiece. "Marcus, I'm running the audio through my limited Velhari reference database. I believe she may be asking who sent you." "Nobody sent me," I said, keeping my eyes on her face. "I came on my own. I heard the signal and I came." More silence. The bioluminescent pulse under her skin shifted. A different pattern now. Something that moved from her collarbone outward like ripples in water. Then she said something else and her voice cracked on it. Not dramatically. Just cracked. Like someone who's been holding something in for a long time and can't hold it perfectly anymore. SEREN. I think she's saying something about being alone, that she's been alone for, I can't get the time unit clearly, some duration. She'd been alone in this wrecked, dying pocket of air, in this sealed chamber with her arm injured and her ship destroyed around her. And she'd been alone. "You're not alone now," I said. "Let's get you out of here." Getting her out was not simple. The first problem was the arm. As soon as I moved toward her to help her up, she made a sound that was clearly pain, and I stopped immediately. Her left arm, when I looked at it more carefully in that amber light, was held at an angle that didn't look right. Not a clean break, something more complex. Shoulder, maybe, or upper arm, or both. The second problem was her size. She was taller than me by maybe 15 centimeters, and in zero-G that changes the geometry of everything. Moving an injured person in zero-G when they're a different height than you planned for is a puzzle with no clean solution. The third problem was time. My suit's atmosphere sensors were telling me that the breathable pocket in this section of the wreck was degrading. Whatever emergency system had been maintaining it was running out of capacity. We had maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. I went back through the bent door, grabbed my pack, came back. Inside the pack, a medical scanner that I'd bought secondhand from a GU surplus auction, a basic trauma kit with supplies scaled for human physiology, a limitation I was suddenly very aware of, a folded evacuation sled that worked in zero-G, and a length of smart cord that could be programmed to exert controlled tension. She watched me unpack everything. Her expression was still unreadable, but she was paying attention. Sharp attention, the kind of attention that says I am assessing whether I can trust you. I held up the medical scanner, looked at her, gestured between the scanner and her arm, a question that hopefully transcended language. A pause, then a small motion of her uninjured hand, something that might have been permission, or resignation, hard to tell. The medical scanner was not designed for Velhari physiology. I want to be clear about that. It was designed for human physiology, with secondary settings for the 6 most commercially common spacefaring species, none of which were Velhari. So what I got back was data that was partial and probably inaccurate in its specifics. But some things are universal. The color coding that indicates skeletal trauma was showing up in red around her left shoulder and upper arm. The readings that correspond to blood oxygen were low in ways that made me worry, even adjusted for the fact that Velhari blood chemistry is different from human. She was hurt, she needed a proper medical facility. Everything else was negotiation. I unfolded the evacuation sled. It's about 2 meters long, a rigid frame with soft attachment points designed to secure a person without putting pressure on injured areas. And she looked at it with an expression that this time I could read. She did not want to be carried. I know, I said, I know you don't want this. But we have. I tapped my suit sensor readout, held it where she could see the time indicator, then pointed at the ceiling, then at the door, trying to convey limited time, need to move. Maybe 15 minutes of breathable air in here. So we do this the easy way or the hard way, but we do it. She looked at the readout, she looked at me. Then she reached out her uninjured hand and touched the sled frame once lightly. That was all. I took it as agreement. Moving her through the wrecked corridor and out through the compromised airlock section took 11 of our 15 minutes. I know because SEREN was counting down in my earpiece, which was either helpful or the most stressful thing I'd ever experienced, depending on how you looked at it. She was quiet through most of it. She made small sounds when the pain was significant, not dramatic, not loud, just these brief exhales that were almost suppressed, like she was fighting against letting them out. That kind of restraint is exhausting. I've done it myself after injuries, that particular performance of being fine when you're not. It takes energy you don't have. Once, just once, when I was maneuvering her through a section where the corridor had partially collapsed and the passage was tight, and I had to rotate the sled in a way that must have sent pain through her shoulder, she made a sound that was louder than the others, and her uninjured hand reached out and found my forearm and gripped it. Not hard, just gripped it, contact. Human, or whatever the Velhari equivalent is, of needing something solid to hold onto. I stopped moving. For maybe 3 seconds I just stayed still and let her grip my forearm and said quietly, "I've got you, just breathe." Then I kept moving. Getting her aboard the Rendell was the end of the hard physical part and the beginning of the complicated part. SEREN had already prepared the medical bay, which is a generous term for what is basically a room with a diagnostic bed, a wall of medical supplies, and a screen that SEREN uses to display readings. She'd pulled everything she had on Velhari physiology from her database, which turned out to be less than I'd hoped. 2 academic papers, a GU medical brief from 14 years ago, a species overview from a xenobiology database that was mostly focused on cultural notes rather than anatomy. I got the princess, and I was already thinking of her that way, though I hadn't yet confirmed it, onto the diagnostic bed. She sat up rather than lying down, which I let her do. Insisted on it, actually, in the way that someone insists on things when they can't control much else. Fine, sit up. I wasn't going to argue about posture. SEREN began displaying readings as the diagnostic bed sensors did what they could with non-human physiology. The readouts were flagged with uncertainty margins the size of trucks, but the broad strokes were clear enough. Her respiratory rate is elevated, SEREN said through the bay speakers, having switched from my earpiece. I believe this is consistent with pain response and the atmosphere degradation she experienced. Her circulatory readings are outside my reference ranges for humans, but compared to the academic papers on Velhari physiology, I would assess her as possibly stable, with significant uncertainty. What about the arm? Shoulder joint damage. I'm not familiar enough with Velhari musculoskeletal structure to specify, but there is clear trauma. I can display the scan if you want. Yeah, display it. The image came up on the screen. Even without knowing the anatomy in detail, I could see what was wrong. The shoulder had been dislocated, maybe more than once, maybe forced back incorrectly in the wreck, and there was additional damage around the joint that was going to need specialist care. She was watching the screen too. She could read it better than I could her own anatomy, her own injury. Her expression when she looked at it was something I'd classify as controlled acknowledgement. She knew it was bad. She was not going to fall apart about it. I respected that. I found a stabilizing brace in the trauma kit that wasn't exactly right for her anatomy, but was better than nothing. When I held it up and gestured toward her arm, asking permission again, she nodded, a movement I'd noticed she'd picked up in the past 20 minutes. She'd seen me do it. She was already adapting. That was the first moment I understood that whatever she was very, very quick. The pain management problem was harder. The human medications in my kit, the standard analgesics, the anti-inflammatories, I had no idea what they do to Velhari physiology. Some compounds that are benign in humans are toxic to other species. I wasn't going to give her anything without knowing, and I didn't have the knowledge. I sat down across from her. She was watching me with those amber eyes, her bioluminescence doing the pulse pattern that SEREN had tentatively identified as a distress indicator, though it was slower now than it had been in the wreck. Less urgent. I want to help with the pain, I said, but I don't know enough about your biology to know what's safe to give you. I held up one of the analgesic packages. Human medicine, I don't know if this hurts you or helps you. She looked at the package. She said something, a short phrase in that harmonic voice. SEREN, I'm trying, I think she might be identifying the compound, or asking what's in it, I'm not certain. Can you display the chemical compound on screen? I asked. Displaying. She looked at the screen. Something changed in her expression, recognition maybe. She said a few more words, and then she held out her uninjured hand. She wants it, I said to SEREN. I believe she recognized something in the compound and is indicating it's acceptable. Marcus, this is genuinely outside my confident translation range. I looked at her. She held my gaze steadily, hand still extended. You know what this is, I said, or something close to it. She made a sound, 3 notes almost musical. Then her lips, they were slightly different from human lips, more precisely shaped, moved into something that was almost a smile. Maybe a smile. The best I could say was, not a frown. I put the analgesic in her hand. She administered it herself, which told me the method of administration was universal enough. Within a few minutes, some of the tension in her body eased. Not gone, the injury was significant, and one standard human analgesic was not going to fix that, but eased. She leaned her head back against the wall of the medical bay. She closed her eyes. For about 30 seconds, she just breathed. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me and said something, clearly with intention, not a question this time, a statement. SEREN was quiet for longer than usual. SEREN, I'm working on this one, the structure is complex. A pause. I believe she is telling you her name and possibly her status, her title. What's her name? I cannot reproduce the phonemes accurately, but the second element, what comes after the name, I believe I am recognizing the root as a Velhari term relating to lineage. Specifically, a term that appears in the academic paper referring to the Velhari sovereign family. I sat with that for a moment. So she's... I cannot confirm with certainty, but if my reading is correct, and I want to reiterate the uncertainty here, she may be of the Velhari royal family. A royal courier vessel destroyed, one survivor of the sovereign family. The pieces were arranging themselves into a picture that was significantly above my pay grade. She was watching me, and I think she could tell I was processing something significant, because she tilted her head slightly, a gesture that felt oddly familiar, oddly human, and said something else. SEREN, I think she's asking if you understand who she is. I looked at her, at the torn ceremonial clothing. at the arm held careful and close, at the bioluminescent pulse running slow and steady beneath her skin, like her own internal light, like something that couldn't be put out even when everything else had been. "Yeah," I said, "I think I'm starting to." What came next was 40 hours that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to put into the right order. Because 40 hours after I brought her aboard the Rendell, they found us. I should have anticipated it, I know that. In retrospect, it's obvious. A royal courier vessel destroyed in the Cashin Belt, a princess missing, and whatever force had done this to her ship would be looking for survivors, or looking to ensure there were no survivors. But I was running on 6 days of bad sleep and recycled coffee, and the particular kind of focused energy that comes from a crisis, and I wasn't thinking strategically. I was thinking about the woman in my medical bay, about whether the stabilizing brace was helping or hurting, about whether SEREN's translation attempts were improving, about the small moments of communication that were starting to emerge between us. She'd told me her name again, slower, watching my face while she said it. I'd tried to reproduce it. I failed completely, and something happened in her expression. That almost smile, the closest thing I'd found to a reliable, readable expression. And she tried again, even slower, and I tried again and got slightly less wrong, and she made a sound that SEREN said might be a word meaning close enough or acceptable or possibly I appreciate the effort. I called her Lyra, and she tilted her head at it and seemed to decide it was fine. She was sleeping, finally, properly sleeping, the analgesic and the relative safety of the ship having done enough, when SEREN woke me from my own half-sleep in the pilot's chair. "Marcus," the tone was different this time, not the soft chime, not quite the klaxon, but something with urgency in it. "We have a problem." I was awake instantly. "What kind?" "3 vessels, just dropped out of FTL approximately 2 light minutes out and are moving toward our position. Their configuration is..." A pause that told me SEREN was being careful, military. "I don't recognize the specific design, but the approach pattern is tactical. They're running identification suppression." Running ID suppression meant they didn't want to be known. Military vessels running anonymous had one purpose. "Are they scanning us?" "Active scan sweep began approximately 40 seconds ago. They will have our full profile within minutes." I was already standing. "Do they know we're here specifically, or are they sweeping the whole cluster?" "Unknown. The sweep pattern suggests systematic search rather than targeted approach. But Marcus, their course will bring them through our position regardless." "Systematic search, looking for something, looking for survivors maybe, or looking to confirm none existed." "Wake her," I said. Carefully, she was sleeping in that shoulder. I can play a gentle audio tone in the medical bay. "Do it and get our drive spun up, but keep the power signature low. Don't give them anything they're not already going to find." I moved to the pilot's station. The tactical display showed 3 contacts, moving in a spread formation. The middle vessel was larger, maybe twice our size, which still made it small by military standards, but that's relative because small military ships carry the same weapons as large ones. They just have less room for the crew. Lyra appeared in the doorway of the cockpit. She was upright, her uninjured hand braced on the doorframe, her arm still in the stabilizing brace. She'd been asleep for 6 hours, and she looked it, not rumpled exactly, because she maintained something even in exhaustion, but there was a quality of just awoken about her, a slight unfocus in those amber eyes that cleared rapidly as she looked at the tactical display. She understood tactical displays. She stepped into the cockpit. She said something short, controlled. "SEREN, I think she's identifying the vessels. She recognizes them. She knows who they are." More words from Lyra. Her bioluminescence had shifted, a pattern I hadn't seen before. Sharp, quick pulses like a heartbeat elevated. SEREN, slowly. "I'm picking up words I've seen in the cultural database. The context is I believe she may be using a term that indicates enemies of the royal house. Or possibly, traitors. Marcus, the vocabulary is complex and I could be misreading, but her affect suggests the people on those ships are not friendly to her." Not friendly to her? The people who destroyed her ship. The people who'd left her in a wrecked, dying vessel with a broken shoulder and a ghost beacon and hope of survival measured in percentages. She turned to look at me. Her bioluminescence was doing that elevated pattern, but her face was steady. She said something directly, making eye contact. SEREN was quiet for 3 full seconds. SEREN. She said, I'm fairly confident about this one because the structure is simple. She said something like, they will not let me be found alive. The 3 ships were 1.8 light minutes out and closing. Here's the thing about the Rendell that most people wouldn't know from looking at her. She's ugly, she's old. She's been patched together from salvaged parts for 22 years and she looks it. When you put her next to anything with a current registration and a recent build date, she looks like something that should be in a museum or a scrap yard. But she's fast. Not in a straight line. She's not a racing ship, she never was. But she's maneuverable in a way that newer ships aren't, because her drive system is an older model that doesn't have the efficiency limiters that current regulations require. It's another one of those things that's technically illegal and practically necessary. And in a debris field, in a cluster of wreckage where the geometry is complex and the sensor returns are chaotic, maneuverability beats speed every time. I know the Cashin belt. I've been running salvage out here for 4 years. I know the drift patterns of the major debris clusters. I know where the sensor shadows are, places where the density of the wreckage blocks active scans and makes you briefly invisible. I know the sections where FTL is impossible because the mass concentration is too unpredictable, which means any pursuit has to be sublight, which is where the Rendell's advantages matter. I started running through options. Option 1, run. Full drive, straight out of the belt, try to put enough distance to reach FTL before they catch us. Problem, the Rendell's drive signature when running full would be obvious on every sensor they had, and they'd be faster in a straight line. We'd get maybe 2 minutes before they were close enough that it didn't matter. Option 2, hide, deep in the debris field sensor shadow, wait them out. Problem, they were doing a systematic search sweep. They'd get to us eventually, and Lyra needed medical care I couldn't provide. Hiding indefinitely was just a slower version of losing. Option 3, something creative. Lyra had come to stand beside me at the pilot's station. She was looking at the tactical display with an expression of focused concentration, and I could see her processing it, the positions of the 3 ships, the spread pattern, the movement vectors. She reached out with her uninjured hand and touched the display and traced a line. Then she looked at me and said something. SEREN. She's pointing to a region of the debris field, the denser section. I believe she's suggesting it's difficult to be certain, but I believe she may be indicating a heading. She knows the belt. I don't know how she would unless SEREN paused. Unless the Royal Courier's navigation data included this region. She may have studied the charts. I looked at the region she'd indicated. It was the densest part of the cluster, the section where the 3-fleet collision had deposited the largest concentrations of wreckage. Bad for visibility, bad for sensors, bad for navigation. Also the part I knew best because the best salvage was there. I know that section, I said. She looked at me. Then she touched the display again and this time drew a curved line around the back of the dense section, emerging on the far side. A route. SEREN. If she's suggesting what I think she's suggesting, the trajectory would take us through the densest sensor shadow region and out the other side, emerging in a direction away from the search ships. Blind flying through dense wreckage, I said. Yes. At speed. Also yes. I looked at Lyra, she looked at me. Her bioluminescence had settled into a steadier pattern, not calm exactly, but resolved, decided. Can you hold on? I said. I mimed gripping something with my hand, looked at her arm, made a questioning gesture. She reached out and gripped the edge of the co-pilot's seat with her uninjured hand. Looked at me. Okay, I said, okay. I sat down and put my hands on the controls. I have done a lot of things in a Rendell in 11 years of independent space work that I would classify as inadvisable. What I did in the next 22 minutes was the most inadvisable of all of them. Dense wreckage navigation at speed is exactly as difficult as it sounds. The debris pieces range from smaller than a fist to larger than my ship, and they're not stationary. They drift in complex patterns, slowly rotating, occasionally colliding and changing trajectory in ways that make prediction imperfect. SEREN's collision avoidance system is good, but it's not perfect, and at the speeds I was pushing, the response window for a new obstacle was measured in fractions of a second. I flew by instinct, I flew by 4 years of knowing this debris field. I flew by something that I can't quite describe except to say it was like a conversation between me and the ship, her hull plates telling me things through the seat, and the stick that the instruments couldn't get me in time. 3 times we took glancing impacts from pieces I didn't quite avoid. 3 flashes of wrong sound and wrong sensation through the hull, and SCREN called out damage reports in a steady voice that I noted and filed and couldn't deal with until later. Twice, on the sensor display, I watched one of the pursuing ships try to follow us into the dense section and pull back when their collision warnings exceeded acceptable parameters. They were not willing to do what I was doing. That was the bet I'd made. Lyra held on to the co-pilot's seat and did not make a sound. Not one. For 22 minutes of the hardest flying I'd ever done, she held on with her uninjured hand and braced with her feet and kept her eyes either on the display or on me and did not make a sound. Once, when we took the second impact and the ship lurched hard to starboard, and I fought the controls for 3 seconds that felt like 30, her grip on the seat tightened until I could see the color change even in her blue-gray hand. But she didn't make a sound. At minute 20, SCREN said, "We're approaching the emergence point. Pursuing ships. 2 have pulled back to the outer edge of the dense section. The 3rd is maintaining position approximately 1.2 light minutes on our previous bearing. They're waiting to see where we emerge. Direction: if we emerge as indicated by the trajectory, we come out bearing 070, which is away from the 3rd ship. Yes, and within range of the relay station at waypoint 11 in approximately. How long? At current speed, 14 minutes to FTL-capable space, then 40 minutes to waypoint 11. Waypoint 11, a small independent station, not geo-controlled. Neutral jurisdiction, basically, one of those places that exists in the gaps between official territories and asks no questions of its customers because asking questions is bad for business. It also had a medical facility. "Get us there," I said. And then we were through the dense section, into the clearer space beyond, and I pushed the Rendel's drive harder than I'd pushed it in 2 years, and the stars streaked, and we ran. They followed us to the edge of FTL-capable space. The 3rd ship, which had been waiting, it picked us up on the far side of the dense section and accelerated. It was faster than us in a straight line. I knew it would be. What I was counting on was that we'd gotten enough of a head start. It was close. SCREN was running calculations every 30 seconds and reading them out, and the margin was shrinking and then holding and then shrinking again, and I was pushing a drive that wasn't designed to be pushed this hard, and 2 of the damage warning indicators on my console were showing amber in ways I was going to pretend not to see until this was over. Lyra had moved to the co-pilot's seat. Properly in it now, buckled, she'd worked out the safety restraints without asking for help, studying them for about 15 seconds, and then fastening them with the focused efficiency of someone who is very good at adapting to unfamiliar things. She was watching the pursuit ship on the display. She said something, quiet, almost to herself. SCREN very quietly. She said something that Marcus, the closest translation I can manage is something like, so it was them after all. There was a weight in that, the kind of weight that comes from a suspicion being confirmed, the kind that isn't surprise exactly but still hurts. I didn't say anything, I just flew. At the 11-minute mark, the pursuing ship fired. Not weapons, not directly at us, the range was still too great for accurate engagement. But sensor pulses, targeting locks, the kind designed to make you know you've been marked. Intimidation, or maybe a warning. Stop, or the next thing we send is less polite. Lyra saw the targeting indicators appear on the display. She reached over and put her uninjured hand on the console in front of her. For a moment I thought she was going to try to do something, operate some control she'd identified. But she didn't. She just put her hand there and sat very still. SCREN FTL window. 90 seconds. The targeting lock tightened. I felt it the way you feel it, not physically, but that particular sensation of being in someone's sights that space combat pilots describe, and that I'd experienced exactly once before in my career and hoped never to experience again. 60 seconds. Lyra hadn't moved. Her hand was still on the console. Her bioluminescence was doing something I hadn't seen before, not the elevated distress pulse, not the resolved, settled pattern, something else. Something slow and deliberate, moving from her chest outward in expanding rings, like she was breathing it into the ship, like she was holding something. 30 seconds. The pursuing ship accelerated. 15. It fired. Not the targeting pulses, real weapons. I saw the discharge signature on the display and my hands were already moving. Evasive. A sideways push that cost us a second of straight-line speed and gained us 3 meters of lateral distance that was almost certainly not enough. FTL window achieved. Jump available. I jumped. FTL travel in a ship like the Rendell doesn't feel like the entertainment media version. There's no beautiful star streaking, no cinematic blue tunnel. There's a compression feeling, a brief wrongness of sensation that your body doesn't have good language for, and then you're somewhere else and everything is quiet. The quiet after an FTL jump is one of my favorite things in space. It's absolute. External sounds disappear. The drive drops to maintenance hum. For a few seconds, the universe seems to hold its breath. In that quiet, I heard Lyra exhale. Just exhale. A long, careful breath out, the kind you take when you've been holding something for a while. Her hand on the console was still. The bioluminescent pattern under her skin had softened, spreading into something slower and warmer. I turned to look at her. She was already looking at me. There was a long moment, 7 seconds, maybe 8, where neither of us said anything. The Rendell hummed around us. SEREN was running post-jump diagnostics in polite silence. Then Lyra said something, clear and deliberate, and this time SEREN didn't hesitate. She said, "You didn't leave me." I held the Rendell on course, 40 minutes to waypoint 11. Amber damage warnings on the console. 3 pursuit ships somewhere behind us in the Cashin belt, at least temporarily unable to follow. "No," I said, "I didn't." She looked at me for another moment. Then she looked forward at the stars, real stars now, not debris, the clean dark of true space, and her bioluminescence settled into a pattern that was different from anything I'd seen yet. Warmer, slower, the rhythm of something returning to something like peace. I'd been in space for 11 years. I'd seen some things, recovered some wreckage, made some decisions in the dark that I wasn't always sure about afterward. This felt different. This felt like something that was going to matter. Waypoint 11 was exactly what it always is, a tired, functional station at the edge of nowhere, built in 3 different decades by 3 different operators, and looking it. The docking ring was crowded with the usual mix of independent haulers, 1 GU survey vessel that was pretending to do maintenance and probably doing intelligence work, and various other ships whose business was their own. The medical facility was on level 3, run by a doctor whose name was Akaffer and whose manner was the efficient, unshockable manner of someone who has treated injuries in neutral jurisdiction for 15 years. She was human. She had, according to the station medical registry, training in 5 species anatomy. Velhari was not in those 5. But she had access to GU medical databases that my second-hand scanner and SEREN's academic papers could not match. And she had something that mattered more, which was the look she gave when I brought Lyra through her door, not a look of alarm or wonder or calculation, but a look of simple, focused assessment. Who is injured? How badly? What do I have to work with? I like people who ask what rather than who. While Akaffer assessed Lyra, a process that involved a lot of data consultation and some careful, negotiated communication through a translation program that was much better than SEREN's reference database, though still imperfect. I went back to the Rendell and ran full diagnostics and began dealing with the damage. The 3 impacts we'd taken in the debris field had done real work. Nothing catastrophic, I'd have known immediately, but meaningful damage. Hull integrity was compromised in 1 section, which was a patch job. The secondary sensor array had taken the worst of it and was going to need replacement components I'd have to source from Waypoint 11's parts market at prices I didn't want to think about. And the drive, pushed as hard as I'd pushed it, was showing stress indicators that needed attention before I'd feel safe making another jump of that distance. I sat in the engine room, under the main drive housing, doing work I could do with my hands and letting my brain run. The princess of the Velhari sovereign house, found in a wrecked royal courier in restricted space, surviving an assassination that had destroyed her ship and everyone else on it. The ships that had pursued us, unidentified, running ID suppression, equipped with weapons they'd been willing to use. The words SEREN had translated, so it was them after all. Whatever this was, it was political in a way that was far above my operational clearance. It involved Velhari internal affairs, and the Galactic Union's policy on Velhari internal affairs was studied non-interference, because the Velhari had made it very clear, across a long history of GU diplomatic contact, that non-interference was the condition on which they tolerated GU presence in this region of space at all. Which meant that if I walked into Waypoint 11's communication center and reported a Velhari royal survivor of an apparent assassination to the GU station vessel that was pretending to do maintenance out on the docking ring. I thought about that. I thought about who would receive that report, about what they would do, about the particular way that galactic politics tends to treat inconvenient survivors of inconvenient incidents. I thought about Lyra sitting in the ruins of her ship, alone, waiting. I thought about, they will not let me be found alive. I tightened a coupling that didn't strictly need tightening, because I needed to do something with my hands while I decided. 3 hours later, I was back in the medical bay when she came in. Akafar had done what she could, which was actually quite a lot, it turned out, because Akafar had a resourcefulness that matched her unshockable manner. The shoulder joint had been partially addressed through a combination of targeted treatment protocols and some improvisation that the doctor was almost proud of. It wasn't a perfect fix. It needed follow-up from a specialist who knew Velhari anatomy. But it was stable, and some of the pain was controlled, and Lyra moved with slightly less of that careful holding close that had characterized her since I'd found her. She came into the medical bay, my medical bay, on the Rendell. I'd brought her back from Akafar's facility, and found me sitting on the floor next to the diagnostic bed, because the chair was on the other side of the room and I hadn't bothered to get up. I had a mug of coffee, bad coffee, the Rendell's recycled situation, but warm, and I was reading through the damage reports on a handheld display. She looked at me sitting on the floor and made the sound that I'd started identifying as something like, "What are you doing?" Then she sat down on the floor too, which surprised me, because she didn't have to and her shoulder made it complicated and the floor was cold. She sat down on the floor and looked at me and said something. SEREN through the bay speaker. She is asking you something. The structure, she's asking what you intend to do, or possibly what is your plan. Right, I set down the damage report. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. She waited. She was good at waiting, patient in a way that suggested she'd learned it deliberately. Here's what I know, I said, directing it partly to her and partly to myself, working through it out loud. Someone tried to kill you. They probably know they failed, or they'll figure it out. They know the Rendell. They'll be looking for us. I counted on my fingers. You need medical care I can't fully provide. I need to get my ship repaired. And somewhere in there, we need to figure out what happens next for you. She watched my face while I spoke, reading what she could read in expression and gesture and tone. Then she said something, slow, deliberate, clearly intending me to hear it clearly. SEREN, I am working through this. Some of it is she appears to be telling you something about herself, about her situation. The word I keep encountering is one I've seen in the cultural database in the context of succession, or standing, political standing. Her standing in the royal succession. I think so, and she may be saying something about why this happened to her. But Marcus, I want to be honest about the limits of what I'm getting. I'm filling in gaps, and I could be significantly wrong. Lyra seemed to understand that we were having a translation difficulty. She paused, looked around the medical bay. Then she looked at SEREN's speaker panel. She'd identified early on that the voice came from the ship system, and she'd developed a habit of directing herself to the panel when she was speaking for translation, and said something with a deliberate simplicity, like she was choosing words for minimum ambiguity. SEREN, she said, and I'm fairly confident here I have no one, or possibly there is no one left. The isolation emphasis is consistent. The sentence landed quietly in the room. No one left. Whatever had happened on that royal courier, whatever the attack had been, whoever the people on those ships were, she was alone in a way that went beyond just being the only survivor of a crash. She was alone in the larger sense, the political sense. The kind of alone that means the structures you were supposed to be able to rely on are the things that tried to kill you. I didn't say anything for a moment, just sat with it. Then I said, "You have me, for whatever that's worth." Seren translated it. Lyra was quiet. Her bioluminescence shifted, slowly, warmly. The pattern that I'd started thinking of as close to peace. She said something short. Seren. A pause. Then carefully, I believe she said, "It is worth more than you know." The Rendell left waypoint 11:18 hours later, running under a modified transponder ID that cost me 300 credits and a favor from a contact in the station's parts market. Modified transponder ID? Technically illegal, practically necessary. We were going somewhere safe. Somewhere that the people who'd been running ID suppression in the Cashin Belt wouldn't know to look. I had a few options. I'd chosen the one that took the most knowledge of independent operator routes to find, which meant the one that GU wouldn't know, and whoever had built those pursuit ships probably wouldn't know either. Lyra had been given a change of clothes, the closest thing my limited wardrobe could offer, which was one of my older work jackets and a set of the thermal underlayers that are blessedly nonspecific in their fit. She'd left the ruined ceremonial clothing in the medical bay. I didn't know what to do with it. Fold it carefully and offer it back. It seemed important. I folded it carefully and put it on the shelf. She was in the co-pilot's seat when I came to the cockpit for departure. She'd become comfortable there quickly. She understood ship interfaces well enough to read the displays without my explaining them, different interfaces from what she was used to, certainly, but she was fast. I sat down, started the pre-departure sequence. Seren ran through her checks. Outside the viewport, Waypoint 11's docking ring lights glowed amber in the dark. Lyra said something. Seren. A pause that this time had a different quality, not uncertainty, but something like care. Like Seren was choosing how to phrase something. She said, "Marcus, I'm translating loosely because the harmonic structure adds nuance I can't fully capture in single language output." She said something like, "Don't leave me behind. Whatever comes next, don't leave me behind." The same words she'd whispered in the wreckage, maybe, or close enough. I looked at her. She looked at me, amber eyes in the cockpit's dim light, bioluminescence soft and steady beneath her skin. "I won't," I said. Then I brought the Rendell out of the docking ring and into open space. She didn't look at the stars. She looked forward at the darkness ahead with an expression that was some combination of things I was slowly learning to read. Something like grief for what was behind. Something like not certainty, not hope exactly, but willingness. The willingness to move forward into whatever was coming. I understood that. I understood it in a way that didn't need translating. The Rendell accelerated, the stars shifted, and we went. I want to tell you that what came after was simpler. That we found our way to safety, and the political situation resolved, and her position was restored, and everything worked out with the clean resolution of an entertainment narrative. But I said I'd start at the beginning and not skip the parts that make me look bad, and I also said I'd be honest. So here's honest. What came after was 3 more months of staying ahead of people who were very motivated to find us, of navigating a political situation I only partially understood, of learning to communicate with each other in a language we were building in real time from borrowed words and gesture and expression, and the particular shorthand that develops between people who are surviving the same thing. 3 months of that. And I will tell you this, Lyra, by the end I could almost say her real name, almost. My accent was still wrong, but she'd stopped correcting me after the first month, which I took as a sign either of acceptance or exhaustion. She was the most remarkable person I had ever spent 3 months in a small ship with. She learned, constantly, relentlessly, in the focused way that told me learning had been trained into her since childhood as a survival skill. English first, because my Velhari was still being generously described as close enough, and by the 2nd month she could hold a conversation in it that was halting but real. She learned the Rendell systems, all of them, not just the pilot displays, every system, as if she might need to fly the ship alone someday and was determined to be ready. She learned how to make the recycled coffee in a way that made it marginally less terrible, which was a contribution I valued deeply. She told me what had happened to her ship, slowly over weeks in pieces as the English improved. It was what I'd been afraid it would be internal to the Velhari royal house, a factional conflict that had been building for years, and a decision someone had made that a diplomatic mission was the opportunity to remove a particular voice from the succession. Her ship had been intercepted. She'd made it to the panic room. Everyone else had not. She told me this the way she told difficult things, factually, steadily, with that controlled acknowledgement that I'd recognized the first day. Not without feeling, but with the feeling kept in its container, handled with respect rather than displayed. I didn't pry at the container. That wasn't my business. What was my business was keeping us alive and keeping the Rendell running and figuring out what the next step was. And in that work, she was a partner. A real one. She thought strategically in ways I didn't, saw angles I missed, pushed back on my plans when she had a reason to, and she always had a reason, never just disagreement for its own sake. Once in the 4th week, when I'd made a call she thought was wrong, and she'd said so clearly in her growing English, and I'd gone ahead anyway, and it had turned out she was right. She'd looked at me with an expression that I'd eventually determined was something like fond exasperation and said, "You are very stubborn for someone of your size." I'd laughed, actually laughed, the kind that surprises you. She'd watched the laugh with that expression that was almost a smile, the one that by now I was reading clearly enough to know was real warmth. "You're going to be fine," I'd said, still laughing a little. She'd tilted her head. "You have said that before." I believe it more each time. She'd looked at me for a moment. Then she'd looked away at the stars, and the bioluminescence had done the warm, slow pattern that I knew now meant something like, "I am almost able to believe you." The political situation eventually found its resolution. Not a clean one, not a comfortable one, but real ones rarely are. There were people within the Velhari system who opposed what had been done to her. Not a majority. Politics never hands you a majority when you need one, but enough. People with enough position and enough conscience to act when the opportunity presented itself. The 3 months we spent moving and hiding and staying ahead of the pursuit gave those people enough time to do things that changed the landscape enough that survival became possible in a less provisional way. I won't describe the negotiations because I wasn't present for most of them and wouldn't understand what I had witnessed. What I know is that at the end of it, there was a Velhari diplomatic vessel, an official one, properly crewed, properly equipped, that came to meet us at the coordinates I'd been given by a source I'd been building trust with for 6 weeks. It came to meet us and take her home. I flew the Rendell to the coordinates. She was in the co-pilot seat, where she'd been for most of those 3 months. The diplomatic vessel appeared on the display, larger than us, clean in the way that things are clean when they have the budget for maintenance, with Velhari markings in the script I couldn't read but had started to recognize. She was quiet for a long time looking at it. "That's your ship," I said. "Yes." She'd stopped saying yes as a single word and started adding things to it, inflection, context, so that the same word in different moments meant different things. This yes meant, yes, and I don't fully know what I feel about it. "You'll be okay," I said. She turned to look at me. A look I'd gotten used to over 3 months, the look of someone who was assessing something honestly rather than reaching for the comfortable answer. "You will be also," she said. "Probably." "Not probably," said firmly in the way she'd developed for corrections. "You will be." I smiled at her. "Okay." We brought the ships alongside each other. The docking process was handled by SEREN and the diplomatic vessel system, 2 AI talking in a technical language I didn't follow. Then the airlock connected, and there was the pressure equalization sound that I'd heard 1,000 times and never thought about, and now was paying attention to because it marked a transition I wasn't sure how to think about. She stood up from the co-pilot's seat. She was wearing the work jacket had been for 3 months, and at some point it had stopped being my old jacket she was using and become her jacket, the way belongings reassigned themselves. She'd done something to the cuff, a small modification I'd noticed but not commented on. The strip of reflective tape on the shoulder, the one that had always been half peeled, was secured now. Fixed. She'd fixed it somewhere in the past weeks without mentioning it. I stood up too. We looked at each other. 3 months of the same ship, the same recycled air, the same bad coffee and bad jokes and hard nights and hard decisions. 3 months of building a language together word by word. 3 months of fighting for the same thing. She said something in Velhari, her own language, not the English she'd worked so hard to learn, something she wanted to say in the words that were native to her. SEREN very softly. She said, "Marcus, this is," I believe she said something like, "there are no words in your language for what you are. I am glad there are words in mine." I didn't try to say anything for a moment. Then, I hope they're good words. Seren translated. Lyra made a sound, not the almost smile, but the actual one, the real one, the one I'd seen maybe 4 times in 3 months, and always felt like something I'd earned rather than been given. She reached out and touched the strip of reflective tape on the jacket's shoulder, the one she'd fixed. "Good words," she said in English. Then she walked through the airlock and into the diplomatic vessel. The Rendell sat at those coordinates for about 10 minutes after the 2 ships separated. Seren knew better than to suggest a heading immediately. She just let the drive idle and waited. I sat in the pilot's chair. The co-pilot's seat was empty. The coffee maker across from the pilot's station was the one she'd figured out, and there was still a cup in the holder that she'd made and hadn't finished. The jacket was with her. The reflective tape was fixed. Seren eventually said, gently, "Where would you like to go?" I thought about it. "Waypoint 11, I said. "I still need those sensor array components." Course plotted. The Rendell accelerated. The stars shifted. I settled back in the chair. 11 years in deep space teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you about the distances between places and the distances between people. It teaches you that the universe is large enough to lose anything in, and also, on occasion, large enough to find something you didn't know you were looking for. I'd been running salvage for 4 years in the Cashin Belt, recovering things from wreckage. That's what I did. I hadn't expected to recover something that was still breathing. The co-pilot seat was empty, but it's different being in a space where someone was than in a space where no one ever came. You feel the shape of the absence differently. I reached over and put my coffee mug in the cup holder on the co-pilot's side. I don't know why, it just seemed like the right thing to do. Outside the viewport, the stars were doing what they always do, being enormous and old and completely indifferent to the small dramas of the small things moving through them. But we were still here. That counts for something,